a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is Tim Matthews. We're not talking about Mission Impossible this time. Instead, we are talking all about DC's latest entry, Shazam.
All right.
How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing good. I was sad that Tom Cruise wasn't in this movie, though.
You know, maybe he could have been the bad guy.
Yeah. Or Tom Hanks.
They could have made it happen.
I would have taken Tom Hanks, too.
Yeah, so we both saw this in theaters. What was your viewing experience like for this?
Mine was great. Actually, both times. I went went twice. The first time, there was definitely a decent amount of people in the theater, but less because I caught a 3:30 showing on the Friday. So I think most people were still probably getting out of work and everything. But the Tuesday one, the theater was packed. And I actually think I saw online that that the movie got a decent boost in its box office on Tuesday. So that's pretty awesome. And everyone they were cracking up, they were clapping. Like it was a really great audience experience. I don't get those as often. I don't get bad ones really either, but usually I go at times when a lot of people aren't there.
As do I. I went and saw this at, I want to say 9 a.m. in an IMAX theater. So
I'm sure it was packed.
It actually wasn't, because I went on Friday. So most people are at work at 9 in the morning.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I would say it was like maybe a third full, which was also the case when I went to go see Aquaman, because I go at odd times, you know. Yeah. It's one of those things where the flexibility with my part-time jobs right now lets me kind of just go see movies, like you said, when no one else is seeing them pretty much.
Exactly.
And I kind of like that because I don't really like being in a super crowded room when I'm watching a movie. And obviously that will have happened for Avengers Endgame already. You know,
I don't know if anyone's going to go see that.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I just like being able to sit there and enjoy the movie and not really have to worry about if someone's going to start talking or if a bunch of people are going to get up during the movie and things like that. So I like those kinds of experiences. And this one met my expectations for that. So that was good. I think someone maybe brought their child and walked their child out when they started getting fussy and then brought them back in when they were done. So, you know, that might be the only thing that happened because, you know, this is a movie where you can expect to see a lot of kids at it just because of the nature of the character Shazam. And I think that's something that is a plus for DC, because some of the darker films, I'm sure plenty of people took their kids to go see Batman versus Superman or, you know, Justice League.
There was a baby at the screening of Us that I went to. So
well, that is a decision. that is what that is.
Yeah.
I mean, there were kids at Pet Sematary when I went. So, you know, it just depends on the parent. But I would expect Shazam to be a more family-friendly DC movie in general.
Though a bit edgy at times that I was like, a couple of the jokes, I was like, I appreciated it because it's like the movie felt like an Amblin movie. So it felt like the type of, you know, kids movies I grew up on where, you know, the kids were, you know, kind of swearing left and right. And it wasn't quite yet, you know, dumbed down to super, super kid friendly. So I like having that balance of, you know, kind of perfect for teenagers and parents, but, you know, also perfect if like a 5-year-old goes, a lot of that stuff will just go over their head. But yeah.
Let's dive into the casting because honestly, for the most part, I wasn't super familiar with a ton of the people in this movie just because of them casting a bunch of kids, teenagers, and what have you. And I don't really keep up with too many teen actors these days. Yeah. But Zachary Levi and Mark Strong are the two big names.
Definitely.
And because they're on opposite sides of the spectrum here, it's like, okay, you know, Mark Strong gets typecast as the villain, I feel like, pretty frequently.
Yeah.
And Zachary Levi, especially in the Shazam suit, just looks like a very, very large child. So
yeah,
it kind of worked out. And then you have Asher Angel as Billy Batson, Jack Dylan Grazer as Freddie Freeman, and those two are the other characters we see the most.
Yeah. Freddie, I knew.
Obviously, at the end, we see more familiar faces, or at least a couple more familiar faces, just because of what happens, which we will dive into. So spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it.
I'll hold my excitement for that part of the discussion.
Yeah, but other than that, were you really familiar with the other people in this movie?
No, yeah, like I definitely wasn't. So I knew Freddie from It, so he was fantastic in that.
Is that what he was in? I was like, this kid looks so familiar.
he's the kid in It, and I'm blanking on his character's name, but the one who he's taking all the pills and it turns out that they're all placebos.
He was Eddie. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's kind of funny because he had a bit more of the kid from Stranger Things role in this. He had a bit more like firecrackery dialogue, but he was terrific. And then Mark Strong's character, Dr.
Savannah.
Yes, Dr. Savannah. His dad in the movie I know as Lionel Luthor from Smallville. But beyond that, I don't know anybody.
Yeah, I totally did not recognize Freddie as the kid from it. And I think it's because he seems taller, at least. You know,
he
these
definitely
kids
seems
grow
taller.
pretty fast. And you mentioned Stranger Things, and that's something that happened in that show too, just within the few years since it aired. And yeah, I would have never caught that, so good catch. So I was more familiar with people than I thought, apparently. But overall, I think most of the performances from the teens and the kids were fine. I don't think I was expecting any sort of Oscar performance from these kids for the most part.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they did a good job and they serviced their roles. I definitely walked out of it being like they were good, but it wasn't like when I walked out of It and was like, oh my God, every single one of those kids, blew it out of the water. Or even Stranger Things. Like I remember watching that and being like, we're at a whole other level of like child actors here. This one, it was, they were good, but they also, I feel like they're the other, kids in the family, in the foster family, they don't really have that much to do. But they did a good job, in the parts that they had. Freddie was definitely the standout. I felt like he was battling for like stealing the scene every time he was on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, I would say fairly solid cast given how many unknowns there were in it. But
yeah,
I don't really think that a lot of the characters they did show were super crucial either at the same time. It's like, yes, the foster family plays a role, but it's Billy and Freddie who are getting into the thick of things. Definitely. So to me, the foster parents, not as important to the story, but they had to put them in there because otherwise where would Billy go? Yeah, and I think funny. With what a lot of those characters were given, they just didn't have too much to work with. You had the older foster daughter, Mary, who was getting ready to go off to college. And you see the struggle a little bit with her, but you don't have time to really get into it. It's like, oh, okay, they sort of just mention this so it's happening. And I would say a lot of my issues with this movie probably stem more from the writing, I think. And that's something that if you don't nail that for every single character, some of the characters suddenly become less important or less memorable and things like that. And I don't know, I feel like I really wanted to like this more than I did, but there were just a lot of moments where it fell a little flat for me. And I think we can sort of just roll this right into talking about the story, because at the heart of it, I was familiar with Shazam's story. I knew it was this kid who said the word Shazam and he turned into a superhero. I've watched plenty of the animated shows to know who the character is, especially, the animated Justice League show. I think pretty much every hero appears in that at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. I pretty much some of the animated stuff and in the comic book Kingdom Come, and then, maybe like if he showed up in like a Justice League thing I was reading or something. Other than that, like I don't know that much about Shazam, he's never really actually been a favorite character of mine. So going into this movie, like from the trailers, I was like, all right, this looks like a lot of fun. But going into it, I wasn't necessarily expecting, oh man, I'm going to be so pumped, like walking out of this movie, because I was going into it with an open, but, somewhat closed mind of just being like, it's Shazam. And it's just going to be big with superheroes, which, is good for me. But I ended up having a ton of fun with this movie. I definitely agree with that, criticisms of the writing. My buddy and I were talking about that. It kind of did a bit what Aquaman did, where they kind of threw everything they could in there.
Yeah.
Not necessarily knowing, are we going to get another one of these? So let's kind of throw everything in there. And both of them had the job of building this outside world to just the normal, regular, Earth. So Aquaman obviously, has Atlantis, and there's a ton of mythology that you got to throw into that. And it's like, so you got your origin, you got your Atlantis, then you got your Black Manta and all this stuff and it's like, we got to cover everything. And then you're introducing magic and all the legend of the wizards and everything. And these are all factors that haven't been in DC movies yet. So I felt like it did a very good job for an origin story. It, covers a lot of the typical beats. I definitely think the family, like, they service their roles, but if we get a sequel, I would like to get to know those characters a bit more. And I think we would, given what transpires later in the movie. But that was definitely wasn't the strongest part. Dr. Savannah's origin, the second time I saw it, I was kind of like, all right, let's get through this opening scene and just get to the stuff with Billy, because especially once Billy, gets the powers and everything, it's the movie just becomes a ton of fun between Billy and Freddy.
Yeah.
And that's when it really picks up.
I actually want to talk about that opening scene, because as I was watching it, I was like, are they going to get to the point anytime soon? And
yeah,
to me, it felt like, yes, the dad and the brother of Dr. Savannah when he was a child, they sucked. There's no doubt about that. But he was also extremely annoying at the same time because, he goes off to this place and then he starts just freaking out in the car, not really understanding that his dad and his brother didn't go anywhere. So he just starts freaking out and distracts them and causes this major accident, essentially, because he just won't calm down. He thinks, everyone is against him. And while I understand why he would think that was the case, I was just like, okay, really? You were told as a kid that you weren't worthy of this thing because you wanted to go to the dark side, basically.
Yeah.
And you are going to spend your whole life obsessing over it.
Yeah.
I know it's a superhero movie and all, but I was like, yeah, this kid was like, what, 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that, Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're left to, especially when it gets to the scene, in the boardroom and everything, I would assume we're left to just fill in the blanks that, especially after that accident, he probably had an absolutely atrocious home life, with his father and his brother, probably consistently accusing him of why his father can't walk anymore. So it's like, yeah, I can fill in the blanks and everything in there. And, assume that this probably led him down a path. And, there's definitely some obsession issues going on. But at the same time, it's like, if we had gotten a bit more, maybe it would have been able to latch into the villain a little stronger. But at the same time, I feel like if we did get a little bit more, I'd probably be on this podcast, saying the opposite and being like, oh man, why didn't we just get to the Billy stuff? I think it's the tough thing with a lot of these superhero movies is that the villain tends to be the weakest, which is disappointing.
I think it was weird to start off with the villain's origin story too, in a sense, because you're going into this expecting Billy and Shazam, and when it takes so long to get there, you're like, oh, okay, how much do we have to see before they get into this? Because it felt like they spent a lot more time building up Dr. Savannah at the beginning than it did building up Billy's character. It's like, okay, Billy ran away from home again, his foster home, and then he gets placed with this new family and he beats up a kid for beating on his disabled foster brother, and then that's his origin story. But with Dr. Savannah, it's like something much deeper that it seems like they go into, and I don't know if that's just because it's something darker as well. And Billy isn't a great kid. He locks the cops in the shop and steals the guy's lunch and everything, and yet he's somehow the one who is worthy. No. As someone who was in Philly for a few years, I would be understandably upset about that too.
Yeah. I was stoked that the movie was in Philly. I didn't know that. I guess apparently in the New 52 take on Shazam, he is in Philadelphia. But me living in the Philly area, that I was super pumped about that, because I was like, oh man, the city never gets love in these superhero movies.
Just in the Rocky ones.
Yeah. He's kind of a superhero.
And some others. There are some others.
Yeah. But it's like, I liked the stuff with Dr. Savannah. Like I thought that like research, project, I thought that was kind of cool. It's like just like obsessively trying to figure out what happened. And through that storyline, you're seeing how, all these different parts like when he went out into the room and into the main room, and you see on all the TVs like a ton of people that are just explaining their experience, and it felt like a play on people like alien abduction stories and everything. Yeah. Like so it's like, and then especially when they went into his office and like the door opens and the one scientist woman Thanos snaps his fingers and she disappears.
Yeah.
But that and it's like, so like that stuff was like cool, and it definitely, I feel like that showed that the wizard's spell was constantly trying to find these people that are worthy. And then of course when Dr. Savannah gets in there, Billy, he's a good enough kid and he's standing up for, his foster brother in that moment. But he is kind of the wizard's last hope. Like they haven't found anybody. Dr. Savannah broke out the 7 deadly sins. And so it's like, it's now or never. Hopefully this kid doesn't suck,
Right. And he does at first, it's a learning process for him because he is, 14, 15, 16, whatever it is. I'm really bad with age in these movies.
Yeah. I think there's a line where he says, I'm basically 15.
Okay. So he's essentially like a freshman, sophomore in high school, something like that. Not that he really goes to school, and that's super important.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things for me where the more I thought about Dr. Savannah's character, the more I found a lot of holes in the writing, because he's supposedly been obsessing about this for years, yet he has a ton of money. But it's hard to believe that he would be taking money from his father, who he despises so much.
Yeah.
Because when we have that boardroom scene, he doesn't want any of the company at all.
Yeah.
He thinks, his dad is someone who is super greedy, but at the same time, he looks like he's a guy who has a ton of money. And it's like, so you're not greedy? You want all this power, and you're not exactly like your father in the end? And really, he is. And I don't think he ever really fully realizes that. But it's one of those things where his obsession just turned him so far that he couldn't come back from it.
Yeah, I think he always wanted what everybody else had. It didn't matter whether it was, his jerk of a father. It's like he wanted everything his father had. He wanted power.
But not from his father.
But not from his father, exactly.
Yeah. So it's like, okay.
I get the impression that he worked with the company in some fashion, because like when he does go through the door, his dad says, this is for board members only. And so maybe he works for the company, but I don't really know why his dad would want him to work for the company if he clearly hates him so much. But he's definitely, I think when he just gets to like go all out and be like a comic book villain, like he's a super fun villain to watch, because it does just feel like, you know, a superhero and supervillain going up against each other. And so it's like, when I don't think about, you know, the real in-depth stuff about his character, it's like, you know what, he's just a cool villain, you know, and the stuff they do with the powers, you know, is kind of interesting. At the 7 Deadly Sins, like the CGI I thought looked great on those. And I couldn't tell if maybe sometimes they were using some practical stuff, but yeah, it was like, he was just, you know, he's a big super villain, which kind of they I feel like they kind of make fun of too. 'Cause it's like, you know, when he first shows up and Shazam's like, you're like a bad guy. And then like Freddy like freaking out and he's like, super villain. Like, so I feel like it kind of works that he's just kind of a prototype, you know, villain, but it is, you know, it is yet another superhero movie where when you do think about the villain and their motivations and everything, you're just kind of like, all right, you know, whether it's DC or Marvel, a lot of them seem to have the same problem.
Yeah. For me, it's like when this movie was really fun, it was great. And then it had some really low moments. So it was like at the end of it, it fell somewhere in the middle for me. And I think, you know, because of how they have to do origin stories, I think it's hard at this point, especially as someone who knows quite a few of the origin stories for a lot of these characters. Like, I had read the Captain Marvel comics before going to see Captain Marvel. Well, before going to see Captain Marvel, actually, before I even knew there was going to be a Captain Marvel movie, really. And
okay, yeah.
Like I said, you know, having watched the Justice League shows, you know that Shazam is a kid who says Shazam and turns into this giant, you know, Superman-like superhero.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, anyone who reads the comics will probably get tired of origin stories faster than everyone else. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily tired of them. I just wish some of them were a little more interesting. And like I said, you know, this ended up being a perfectly fine movie for me by the end of it. And that's okay. You know, I think it's still a step in the right direction for DC, which we'll talk about more later. But I do want to talk about the Wizard and the fact that it takes Billy the entire movie to remember that there were all of those empty thrones in the room because it was something where you didn't really know if that was going to come to fruition when the Wizard said it. And the fact that they did go that direction by the end of the movie, I think was a little surprising for me, but because Billy was in so far over his head, it made sense to do that. And I think that was one of the good moments for this movie too, when you have the entire family turn into their own Shazams. I don't really know what they're called, the Shazamily or something. I don't know what they call it.
I think they're called the Marvel family. At least that was
maybe
what I
not
saw
anymore.
Yeah, maybe not anymore. That's at least what I saw in an article. Yeah, like so when he first gets the powers and everything, you know, it's funny because the second time I was watching it, the Wizard is naming off all the different powers basically that he gets. But while the Wizard's doing that and like the spell's going on, Billy's freaking out because he's just like, what just happened to me? What did you do? And then here's this wizard that he just met who like tells him, you know, that he needs to go and save the day and everything and be the champion. And then he crumbles before his eyes. And, you know, the nice and funny joke where he just kind of like looks at the staff that he was holding on to, like, and freaks out and just drops it. And then, you know, tries to leave. And so it definitely makes sense that he didn't fully register like everything that the Wizard said, but he heard it. But I completely agree with you. Like when I didn't expect anything to come from the thrones. I think maybe while I was watching it, I was just kind of like, oh, you know, what happened to the other wizards? Like, why are there not any other wizards? And, you know, are there going to be other wizards? I maybe like thought, you know, here or there. But I certainly didn't expect, you know, what they were going to go for. And my buddy that I went with, he knows more about the Shazam stuff than I did. And for him, when he saw that moment, he told me after that he was so excited that they went in that direction because he figured, oh, this is probably something that's just kind of too corny or too comic booky, and they're not going to go for it. Let alone in the first movie, which plays into the thing I mentioned of they just kind of like threw everything into this movie. So it is kind of like, where's the next one going to go? But I loved when that whole family showed up. It also may have had something to do with the fact that one of them is Adam Brody. And I was super, super excited that Freddy becomes Adam Brody. And then it was funny while I'm watching the movie, my buddy turns to me, like all I said to him was, there's a super awesome surprise in the third act that you're going to love. And he turns to me at one point and he's like, man, Freddy's kind of like a young Seth Cohen. And I'm just sitting there and I'm just like, don't say anything. And then when it happened, he was like, oh, no way. It was so exciting, and it was fun to see him get to finally be in a DC movie, because he was supposed to be the Flash in Justice League Mortal, directed by George Miller. That never happened. That I'll still always wish happened. But so that was awesome. And then that whole fight scene I thought it was really cool, because I felt like it was done in just a fun way, that it didn't have that, oh, here we go with like the big CGI fight that we see at the end of every DC movie or Marvel movie for that matter. But definitely, like, I love Wonder Woman, but the third act, when it gets into that huge bombastic battle, it's the weaker part of the movie. And so I was a little nervous. Oh man, here we go. They're going to go up against the 7 deadly sins, but they play with the humor so well that it kept me entertained the whole time. And I thought that fight scene was definitely one of the highlights of the movie.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned Adam Brody, because this is the moment I was talking about where more familiar faces pop up, at least for me, because then Darla becomes superhero Darla, played by Megan Good. Michelle Borth, from? Who I have seen in, I think Michelle Borth is in Hawaii Five-O. Megan Good has been in a few things I've seen, but I think she's going to be in some upcoming movie called The Intruder.
Yeah, I'm pulling up her IMDb. I'm glad you knew her name, because she was one that it was like, I recognize her, and I swear I've seen her and stuff. Yeah,
she was in Minority Report when that started as a TV show, and she is going to be in The Intruder with Michael Ealy and Dennis Quaid coming this year. I don't know the exact release date on that. I think it might be out pretty close to when this episode comes out, but she's sort of someone who has just popped up in a bunch of stuff that I've happened to see.
I know her from she was in Brick, the Rian Johnson his debut movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I know her from that. Okay. And I probably recognized her a lot from, she was in 7 episodes of Californication. So
yes, and then superhero Eugene was in Riverdale and played Reggie the first season before he was recast. Okay. So Ross Butler was the original Reggie in Riverdale, and I totally forgot about that recasting, because
I didn't realize they recast
so fast. Yeah, things ramped up so fast in Riverdale, as I'm sure you know. So
oh yes, I'm caught up.
Because I was watching the scene and I was like, so many of these faces look familiar, and really, Adam Brody I was familiar with just from not even really anything I had seen him in, because I did not watch him as Seth Cohen. I know, tragedy. But, Michelle Borth was in Hawaii Five-O when I was still watching that, but I gave that up. And I was just like, these people all look familiar except for superhero Pedro. I was like, I don't know who this guy is. I'm sorry.
I don't know him. Supposedly, and I could have this wrong. It was in the article I was reading, but it sounded like he was also supposed to be in Justice League Mortal. Okay. And so it was another, like, hey, we're sorry that didn't happen. Like, here, let's put him in. But I don't remember who he was supposed to be, and I certainly couldn't think of anything that I've seen him in. And probably at that point I was just, fawning over Adam Brody. So
yeah, it looks like, based on what I can see on IMDb, that he's been in the least amount of things. He has been in some TV shows, none of which I have happened to watch, so that would be why I didn't recognize him. But it's one of those things where, like I said, you don't need to recognize everyone in a movie to sort of get that big movie vibe going. And if I'm not mistaken, Shazam was a pretty mid-level budget for a superhero movie. You know, it's not going to be Avengers kind of money by any means.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the budget was. I'm sure it was cheaper than...
It says 80 to 100 million, and I believe the
wow.
Avengers movies are getting up into like the 200s.
Yeah, that's surprising. And I know Aquaman was more because of all the CGI.
Right. It's like, it's a lot of money, but it's also cheap by Hollywood standards.
But yeah, especially by superhero standards of what we're used to. But I mean, hopefully, because of the fact that it has the, you know, the smaller budget, you know, hopefully it makes much more of a nice profit towards pushing it forward. Because at least, like, some of the stuff I've been reading about different ways that they could go with the sequels, it sounds like they can just really get weird with these movies, and I think that's what excites me a bit the most about the DC stuff right now, is just getting weird with it. That's impressive with the budget. I mean, and there was definitely, like, you know, like in all of these movies, you know, there were shots where I was like, that's questionable CGI, but overall I was pretty impressed. I definitely feel like a lot of the CGI went into the 7 Deadly Sins.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just because of how much we see of them at the end too, and that big fight scene at the fair, a lot of the CGI happened there, and you can definitely tell that that's where they sort of really wanted to focus their energy, because a lot of the stuff that Zachary Levi was doing when he was testing his powers with Freddy and everything, that could have been more practical effects by far, just using cables and lifting him up in the air and dropping him down when he falls trying to fly.
Definitely.
And I think, you know, like you said, sometimes you can tell, but in this one, I wasn't actively aware of anything looking too horrible, which by this point you wouldn't expect anything to look that bad. You know, it's not the 80s anymore, even the 90s. You know, CGI has vastly improved, especially with the budgets that people are putting into these superhero movies now. But is there anything else about the story specifically that you want to touch on before we dive into how this fits in with what DC is doing with its movies now? I
think, you know, for the story, I think the stuff that I really enjoyed was just the charm that the movie had. I really enjoyed its just kind of really just pushing for basically the straight comedy with like the heart and family, you know, stuff mixed in there. You know, it could come off corny, but I feel like any corniness was in like a good way, because it's the corniness that is built around that family, like the stuff at the dinner table, like all those things, like it totally makes sense. And so, you know, it's when it's the, you know, everyone, you know, grab the staff and, you know, everyone say my name and they all say Billy. And he's like, no. And then, you know, it all comes together in that way. And, you know, I really appreciated the tone for it. So for whatever faults or things that weren't as strong, I feel like the good stuff really, really stood high in this movie to make me enjoy a Shazam movie way more than I ever expected that I would, and definitely to be excited for, you know, the stuff going forward. Oh, and I just want to mention I kind of enjoyed the fight with him and Dr. Savannah when they were flying around. I got some real like Man of Steel vibes with how it was filmed. And I don't know if it was intentional or if it was just kind of like, you know, a nod, or if that's just the best way to film, you know, people flying through a city. But it felt a bit like the Superman versus Zod, except, you know, funnier, you know, especially when they're a mile away from each other and Dr. Savannah is giving the, you know, super basic villain speech, and then they cut to Shazam and he can't hear him. You know, it was little things like that, playing with your expectations of what you think is going to happen, and then they go against it, and, you know, and it makes you laugh. So I thought the movie did really well with that stuff. And then of course the ending I thought was really clever. I don't know if you wanted to get to that yet.
The Superman cameo?
Yeah.
Somewhat cameo? The Superman suit cameo.
I had heard about that scene and I didn't know if it was going to be in it because obviously it's the internet. I didn't know if it was true, but I heard obviously that Henry Cavill wasn't going to be in it. They couldn't schedule it or whatever. Maybe he's still Superman. Maybe he's not. Whatever's going on with that, I don't know. But I thought it really worked in the ending of just having just Freddy's reaction where he just turns and he's like, "Ah!" And then it just cuts. Like, as much as I kind of wanted Henry Cavill to sit down, I almost feel like that was another subverting your expectations, that I was just like, that was kind of perfect the way they did it, even though it's somewhat of a bummer.
Yeah, I think it's DC saying, hey, we still know Superman exists. You know, we haven't forgotten about this character, but we aren't going to show you his face because we don't know what we're doing just yet.
Right,
and
yeah.
That's totally fine by me. You know,
yeah.
I don't know if the cameo was necessary, but it was fun because of how much it means to Freddy.
Definitely. This kind of basically plays into what this movie means, like with the universe and everything. It was really cool to see how unabashedly, like, just like unafraid they were to reference the DC universe. You know, Shazam mentioning Cape Crusader and Freddy just being like, that's Batman. All of Freddy's t-shirts, like the fact that there's merchandise for all the Justice League.
Yeah, this was a huge ad for DC, basically. It was a very meta DC advertising ploy to get kids into a lot of these things, because I was at the Batman 80th anniversary panel at WonderCon, and one of the ladies there said something to the effect of, I feel like everyone is born knowing Batman, like knowing who Batman is. And I kind of agree, because it's like, are there people who don't know who Batman? I'm sure there are people out there who don't know who Batman is just because they don't have the access to, you know, TV, internet, what have you. But for the most part, in the United States, that is something that a lot of people have access to. And I can't remember when I first knew about Batman. I just knew about Batman. And,
exactly. It's like you said, it's just, or as they said at the panel, like it's oddly ingrained in you before you even realize that you know what Batman is. You know, it's kind of like the Jaws theme. Like if you're playing in a pool and you're a kid, you already have this like feeling of I should fear Jaws, with your parents just going like dun dun without ever knowing anything about Jaws. Like it's these certain things in pop culture that it's like just subtly get in there when you're younger, and then when you really truly learn about it, you kind of feel like you always knew about it. And so it is, like you said, hard to think, well, when did I learn about Batman? I don't know, because as far as I know, I always did.
Yeah. And I think at some point it's going to be like that with a lot of other superheroes. Obviously,
Definitely.
Superman and Spider-Man are probably two of the bigger ones at the moment, but even Iron Man, Captain America, because of these movies, people are sort of always going to know who these characters are going forward.
Definitely.
And with Shazam, while I don't think Shazam is quite there yet,
No.
putting him into this universe, being like, hey, this guy is friends with Superman at the very end of the movie, and having Freddy be just like the audience, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, I'm stoked on Batman. I'm stoked on Superman. I'm wearing an Aquaman shirt. Freddy is the rest of us, basically.
Yeah, he is fandom. Like,
yeah, and he knows everything that there is to know about superheroes, which even though in this movie it's still dorky and he gets beat up for it, basically, that's increasingly not the case. You know, it's cool to like superheroes now. You know, you aren't going to get a bunch of crap about it from a bunch of people because it's just the norm. A lot of different stories are being told through the superhero lens. You have heist movies happening in superhero movies. You have, you know, these big action adventure movies, these big space operas with Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, it's so diverse. Well, at least in story, not necessarily in characters, but that's a different thing for a different day. And I think Shazam doesn't need to be in the continuity, basically. And I think DC is really starting to move away from that, especially with things like the upcoming Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix. And, you know, while it would be nice to see more characters than just Wonder Woman get their shot at the DC movies. They are working on things like Birds of Prey,
Matt
whatever
Reeves'
they are
Batman
going to do
is
with
coming.
Harley Quinn going forward, because there's a lot of things you can do with Harley Quinn. I know DC Universe has a Harley Quinn animated show coming to the service. I believe towards the end of this year, maybe next year. I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't quote me on it.
Yeah, I want to say that's later this year. You've got Swamp Thing coming up. You've already got Doom Patrol going on.
Yeah. There's a lot of wacky things going on in DC Universe, and I love it. So, it's one of those things where Shazam doesn't need to be tied to all of the other DC movies. Only very few companies would be able to pull off what Marvel pulled off and, get you attached to these movies for 10 plus years now and give you this big ending in Avengers Endgame, which is our previous episode. So if you've seen that, go listen to that episode. And there's just so much superhero stuff to go around now. I don't think everything needs to tie into everything. And, saying that Shazam is friends with Superman, that's fine. They exist in the same universe doesn't mean all of the stories need to tie to it. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with a second movie, because I believe they're already working on one, and that doesn't surprise me given that as of April 10th, the movie made over 193 million worldwide. So, it's made back its budget very quickly. Yeah,
and before it even came out, it had like the strongest positivity surrounding it than I think a lot of the recent DC movies. Even Aquaman, like when it was coming out, people were like, oh man, this is great. It's in a step in the new direction, but it still got problems. And then this one, I wasn't hearing a lot of that, going into it. I was hearing a lot of, and it was from like real people seeing it because they did that showing like a week ahead of time. So it wasn't like, the festival reviews that you hear, and you kind of got to be wary of those. It's like, of course. So for me, I was very much a DC kid, even though when I was like much younger, I didn't really think much about either one, but a lot of my stuff just happened to be DC, or, the old pulp things of like The Shadow and The Rocketeer. And then I loved Spider-Man. So like when it came time for Iron Man, my buddy was like, want to go see the Iron Man movie? I was like, sure. I didn't know who the heck Iron Man was, but it's like growing up loving so many of these DC characters. Of course, I would have been super excited for them to have like gotten the universe building thing right and, done something similar to Marvel, but it didn't work. And I'm totally okay with that because I feel like we have that version of a superhero universe. So to keep things from getting stale, on the other side of the aisle, let's get weird. Let's do some random stuff.
Right.
I feel like it works really well in its own way to just say to directors, here, play in the sandbox, but you're doing your thing, just like when you read comic books, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who's, made this connection, but it's, everything exists, in that same continuity of DC. But at the same time, if you're reading Detective Comics or Justice League or Wonder Woman or The Flash, it's a different writer, it's a different artist, it has a different look, it has a different feel. But those characters can still pop in and pop out, and it feels natural. And so if DC can pull that off and not worry about, we have to build towards something, but you just have this sandbox, do your own thing, and maybe a character pops in or pops out, but you don't have to worry about, did you see, 15 movies before this? It's amazing what Marvel did, but it's kind of cool to see DC doing something a little different. And then like with the Joker movie, that's very much an Elseworlds thing. That movie looks bonkers. I can't wait to see it. I still don't know how I feel about, Batman not being in it. It feels kind of a bummer to have this amazing, Joaquin Phoenix playing the Joker and him not go up against Batman, but I'm still going to see it. It looks super interesting. And if they just keep doing like crazy stuff, like it's going to keep me interested. And, just as Marvel's going to keep building their stuff, and who knows what's going to happen after Endgame. I'm sure they'll change things up and do something wild. So, I'm in for it, and I'm excited to see what DC has coming forward, especially Matt Reeves' Batman. because I loved his Planet of the Apes stuff, and I even really liked his Let the Right One In remake when he did Let Me In. I know not everybody feels that way, but I thought he did a nice job. Even though Let the Right One In, one of my personal favorite horror movies of all time, so don't at me. But
yeah, so why don't we go ahead and finish this off with our ratings for the movie. I gave this a 3 out of 5. I was torn between a 2.5 and a 3, so I was like, you know what, when it was fun, it was really fun, so I gave it the 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
And, you know, I will be also writing a review of this, I think, today, so by the time everyone is listening to this, that newsletter will already be out, so I'll link to it in here just in case some people also want a written aspect of this, because I might remember some things in like a few hours from now that I wish I had said on the podcast. That usually happens to me, so
I know I'll listen back to this when you post it and be like, oh man,
dang it, didn't mention that.
It's like when I listen to other people's podcasts and I'm yelling at them in my car for not mentioning something, I'll just be yelling at myself. So it'd be some weird inception.
Yeah, so what did you end up rating this?
I'm really bad with ratings, but
totally fine. I hate doing them, but I do them anyway.
Same. Yeah, I'm on there obsessing with Letterboxd now ever since you got me onto that. And I actually didn't know that we could do like the 0.5s until I saw one of your scores, and I'm like, wait, you can do that? I had to go back and I'm like changing some things because I'm like, no, this is a little bit better. Like I just didn't know that I could do it.
Yeah, that's how I feel about Goodreads right now. It's like, let me have my half stars.
Yeah. So for me, it's like for whatever problems I have with the movie, it's still one of the more fun times that I've had at the movies recently, and I just kind of had like a big smile on my face a lot of the time. So it's, you know, as a movie, I'd probably give it probably like a 3.5, but as just a fun superhero movie that I'm honestly probably going to end up rewatching a decent amount when it comes out, I'd give it a 4.
Nice. It's always fun seeing what kind of superhero movies resonate with people and which ones don't. You know, some people like the darker ones, like the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, and I love most of those.
I love me some dark.
Most of those.
I love me some dark stuff. You know, it's.
But fun is also important.
It is nice to get a little positivity. Yeah, it's a balance. It's a balance.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. It was definitely a fun one to discuss, and I will possibly go see it again. We'll see.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, this was a ton of fun discussing this one, and it's nice to talk about DC movies that, you know, people are happy about.
Yeah, exactly. And that are actual, you know, critical successes in a sense too.
Yeah.
You know, I know there have been mixed reviews on Aquaman and this, but for the most part, I think it's generally a more positive reaction to both of those. So they're going in the right direction here.
Oh, yeah. Like even Aquaman, I feel like people are like, that was really weird. And I'm not totally sure how I felt about it. But at the same time, it was bonkers and awesome. Like I feel like people they have a real like struggle. They're like, I don't know if I want to say I like this, but I had such a good time. Like, I mean, how can you not when there's a big drumming octopus? So, and then at the post credits of this, you had a freaking caterpillar that I had to look up, and he's apparently named Mr. Mind. Go for it. Get weird. I love it.
Yeah. Well, if anyone wants to keep up with us on Twitter, you can do so at Geekdom Pod. We're on Instagram as well at Welcome to Geekdom, Facebook at Welcome to Geekdom too. And as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.